Don't know me. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about some native Irish skate species, how you can find them and kind of what habitats they live in, and what you can do to help research within the skate and ray area. So a little bit, there we go. A little bit about ourselves. The Ray Project, we are a new NGO. We're dedicated to the research and conservation of rays and skates worldwide. But our main focus at the moment is a 5-year species-specific nursery site project that we're looking at in Ireland, and hoping that we can develop this into a larger project by identifying nursery grounds for all different types of species worldwide. We're a group of 3 women and our lovely mascot dog. We're very passionate about Irish wildlife. It means a lot to all 3 of us. This is where I got my start in the marine field, and the same for Caitlin and Megan. We started off by conducting biodiversity surveys on the Wexford coast, and it kind of spitballed into a larger project because the need for skate protection in Ireland was quite grand. And we have an amazing array of species we find in our waters here. And the biggest part of our project is trying to get more people involved in citizen science. We unfortunately can't be in the water all the time. So trying to educate scuba divers and ocean lovers on how they can help with our research and how they can aid in collecting data is a big thing for us. And it's a big project, so we need all the help we can get. So a little bit about skates and rays. Most of you will probably use the term ray for the species we find in our waters, but they're actually a form of skate. So skates and rays both belong to the same order, which is basically a form of fish that all have skeletons comprised out of cartilage, and they are all winged species. So our skates are oviparous, which means they will lay an external egg casing, where our rays will incubate the egg casing inside their uterine body. Skates will have that stinging spine absent compared to our rays. Skates are more likely to have the sharper nose. They'll have a thickier, fleshier tail, and rays will have more of a whip-like tail. Their teeth differ a little bit, and most importantly, where they kind of live is quite different. Our skates tend to be more seafloor dwelling demersal, and our rays are more mid-water species. So looking at their, oh gosh, now the slide won't go. So looking at them a little bit closely in terms of their anatomical differences, they seem similar from far, but when you get real close, you can see they're quite different. So our rays tend to have a protruded head from their body, where skates will be quite flat. They will have a lot more thorns. Some species of rays will have thorns, but it depends between each species. They tend to be more down their spine rather than across their wings. Our skates' only form of defense is the thorns they have on their tails and across their wings. And then depending on the species, they'll have orbital thorns. And you can tell which species, you can differentiate between the species depending on how many thorns they have as well. Our skates will have these double dorsal fins on their tails, which you can see the rays are absent. And another key difference is the form of claspers. So we can see that our skates here will have these long claspers. This is what they use for reproduction. This is a male, and you can see the female is absent of claspers here. So rays will also have claspers, but they tend to be far shorter. This is just a female brown stingray here. So the difference between them, you can spot a male skate from quite a far distance compared to a male ray. Another key difference is their dermal denticles. This roughly translates to skin teeth because their teeth are more like skin cells than they are our teeth. They're constantly replaced. So they are like our skin is kind of always being replaced to keep a strong barrier. Between rays and skates, rays tend to have more flat plate-like teeth compared to our skates that would be a little bit more rigid. This is for really adapted to their food source. A lot of food are crustaceans, so cracking those shells, they'll need to be able to do that. The males will have sharper teeth compared to the females, and this is to help them for reproduction. They'll grab onto the wing of the female, and this basically helps them stay on in order to reproduce properly. So one of the biggest differences we have between rays and skates is this modified pelvic fin. So this is an X-ray of a juvenile skate. It's a really great video to kind of describe how special these skates are. So it's basically the fish that learned to walk but never left. This helps them cut across the seafloor really well without creating too much wave pattern in the water. This helps them sneak up on their prey without really being seen. And rays are absent of these modified pelvic fins. So you can see him walking away there. So most of the time, if you do see a ray out and about, you'll see that their wings won't be moving at all, and they're literally just kind of propelling themselves through the water with these modified pelvic fins. So looking at males and females a little bit closer, we can see these claspers here for the males, and depending on the species as well, the larger species will have longer claspers. Also, the females will tend to be larger than the males. The thorn pattern can also change between males and females. Some species like the flapper skate will have alar thorns, which are present here, and the females will be absent of them. So these are the key differences between males and females. Sorry that. So looking at the skates we have in our waters, these are the skates we'll find in our shallow waters compared to deeper water skates. We're really unlikely to see them. So these are 10 species of skate we can find all around Ireland. Depending on each species, some will be more abundant around the shoreline, where others have now resulted in a small kind of population. And this has changed a lot over the years, but we'll be looking at each of these individually, kind of assessing their habitat and where you could possibly find one if you're out on a dive. Through the slides, we're going to be looking at some IUCN classifications. This is basically how we assess a species of animal or insect and see how abundant their population is, how well they've been assessed. And the species of skate in our waters was last assessed in 2016. So we are probably due for another assessment on them, as things can change really quickly. So this is just a little overview. You'll see these on each slide for each species. So first off is the Thornback. Most of you probably heard of the Thornback skate. This skate is really abundant in our waters, but their population has been up and down over the years. They are quite unique in terms of their colouring. Depending on the species and the area they're from, they'll actually have different spot patterns and markings. So this is kind of a rough look of what a Thornback will look like in terms of their pattern. But the further south you go, the lighter the species sometimes tend to be, as well as the west coast near Connemara and Galway. We find these really unique species of Thornback that you won't find anywhere else in Europe, and they'll have black noses and black target marks. So we're looking to identify why that is. But makes those species, those populations really, really unique. The average length has gone down over the years. Their biomass has changed quite a lot. So we found that the species are quite small compared to what they historically were. They much prefer warmer waters, and they're probably our most sensitive to that of the skate species we find. And high salinity areas, you'll often find a Thornback. They also prefer any kind of seabed. You'll find them on muddy, algae-covered, gravel, sand. They pretty much will live anywhere. So they're quite adaptable in that way. And you're most likely to see their egg casings if you're walking on the beaches. This is their classic egg casing. They'll have a keel present, which is a crimping just on the side here. And they'll have a skirt. They tend not to have too many attachments on them, but you'll often find like pieces of hydroid or seaweed on them. This skate also produces 150 plus egg casings annually, so their population can bounce back really quickly if those nursery areas are protected. So yeah, they can bounce back if we find their areas and cordon them off. So our next one is Cuckoo. This skate is very unique and is a different shape compared to our other skates. They tend to have rounder wings and are pointed a little bit up. They prefer cooler waters. They're a little bit different in terms of their egg laying habits as well. They will seek deeper waters for nursery sites compared to our other skates, which will tend to come into the warmer waters. The warmer water will basically help with the gestation period of the egg casing. So if we have unseasonably cold weather, it will take longer for those egg casings to develop. They have really unique egg casings as well, these long curly ones, but you'll often find the horns broken off. So it's really important that we measure the capsule size and don't include the horns, as that can kind of skew the size and the identification. They'll produce about 90 to 100 annually. They won't have a keel present. They're rarely spotted, but they do prefer a sandier seabed, and juveniles can be quite hard to identify. They don't start to develop these target marks until they're a little bit older. So sometimes they can get misidentified for small-eyed skates quite often. But their population has been in a rapid decline, but they may have migrated out to deeper waters. So this still needs to be assessed. Next is our blonde skate. This is our largest of our quite close shoreline skates. They don't produce very many egg casings, so this is why their population is near threatened. They'll only tend to produce 30 annually. They have really large egg casings, and they like to lay these egg casings in sandbanks. They're often close by to grey seals. They share the same habitat, and you'll find plaice around them as well. They are quite slow maturing species, which also affects their population. And there has been fluctuations over the year. There's been spikes where their populations come up and then they've dropped back down again. They're also quite a frequent part of the grey seal diet. They don't have very many thorns on their back, just mainly down their spine. So it makes them a little bit easier for the grey seals to eat. They tend to often get misidentified with another species, but we'll look at that just closely now. So next is our ungulate. This is one of my favorite species because they're really beautiful, and unfortunately they are an endangered species. They only known stable population is in Schley Bay. We have egg casings reported further north, but no sightings of them in regular habitats in the water have been found. They like to kind of hide among kelp beds. They prefer sand and mud sometimes, but they too do tend to hang around kelp beds more often. They unfortunately are extinct from many local areas in Western Europe, and they do produce only a few egg casings a year. So this affects them in terms of bouncing up their population. Their egg casings will have these attachment points. So species like the blonde and the thornback will have a membrane at the bottom of the egg casing that's really sticky. And as soon as they lay that casing, rocks or seaweed or hydroids will attach onto it to secure it to the seafloor. Our ungulates will have attachment points hanging off of the egg casing, which can help anchor it down. So they're a little bit different, and it's one of the ways we can help identify them is that they have no keel, but they have all these like fringe attachment points hanging off of the side of them. Next is a spotted skate. So this is the species of skate that often gets misidentified for the blonde skate. So when we're assessing their abundance and population, it can be a little bit difficult because they are very similar. So the spotted skates, even though they don't look so different in the illustrations, but when you actually have them closer together, they can be different. They're a smaller bodied species. So that's one of our key ways to identify them, as well as their spot patterns don't go all the way to the edge of their dorsal fins. They have about an inch or two kind of border around. So the blondes will go all the way to the border where the spotteds won't. They are pretty abundant in terms of their range. You'll find them around most places in Ireland, and between the Thornback and the spotted, these are the egg casings you're most likely to see. They have quite a wide distribution through Europe as well, but they tend to like inshore environments, quite sheltered, so their habitat kind of crosses over for the blonde skate as well. So this is why it's one of the difficult skates to identify. They do produce more egg casings though annually, so this helps them in terms of bouncing up their population. And sometimes they're difficult to look when you're looking at egg casings for the ungulates, and they're quite similar, but these ones are a lot smaller, so that helps us. Measuring egg casings is the best way for us to identify them. So one of our most critically endangered species is our flapper skate. Now, this is the world's largest skate species. Some females can range up to 2.5 meters, and we've had records was 2.75. That's the biggest one we've had. They used to have a really large range. They were a part of a grouping called the common skate. This is probably what most people have heard them the name. They are have now been reduced though dramatically because of their large size and their late maturity. They don't tend to reproduce until they're 11 years old, and when they do reproduce, they won't reproduce every year. Sometimes they'll skip a year, and when they do, it's only a few egg casings at a time. So the nursery environments for flapper skates are different to our other skate species. They tend to lay their egg casings on the sea floor, where the flapper skates will prefer boulders, either pinnacles in the ocean, on the side of islands. In terms of the species we know in Scotland around Orkney Islands, they have 3 sites. One is on the side of a loch, one is on the side of an island, and then a few are pinnacles. But they all have that same composition of large boulders where there's quite a low current, and the range of depths can differ. Sometimes they'll be 7 meters deep, and then sometimes they'll be about 24 meters. So they tend to have like the same area in terms of the composition, but when we look at the sites, they'll differ quite largely. So being able to identify them in Irish waters is really important. We do get a lot of sightings in Northern Ireland, and speaking to anglers, we've been getting far more. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to identify nursery sites for these guys and get them protected. Their egg casings are very large, so they're easy to identify. They're nearly as big as your hand, probably bigger than mine. They'll have a really big, thick, ridged keel present. They're quite tough, and depending on the age of them, there'll be a different coloration. The gestation period for these guys are quite long as well, 18 months some take, and because we think they will lay throughout the year, but we're not sure. There's still a lot of data lacking on this species. So the next skate is the blue skate, and this is the other skate that was grouped in that common skate bracket. So they're very similar species, and they also have similar range and tend to hang around the same habitat type. So this is kind of like our blonde and our spotted with the blue and the flapper. Their egg casings are quite different though. They have those presence of those horns where the flapper one doesn't. The coloration isn't the best sign in terms of identification, because depending on how long that egg casing has been on the shoreline, how long it's been exposed to the sun, whether it's an old egg casing or a slightly newer one. So we try not to look at the color of them. Size is the most important. Whether they have that keel present and whether they have horns is the most important way. They'll produce quite a few more egg casings a year, and they are a smaller bodied species. So this helps in terms of their productivity and their maturity. They'll mature at a slightly younger age. They do have similar depth and range, like I said, with the flapper skate. But since 2010, these species have been separated. So being able to identify them separately is really important. One of our least common skate species, and the one we know quite a little about, is small-eyed, some people may know as a painted ray. They're quite beautiful, and they're actually quite timid skate species as well. Working around them in aquaculture, they tend to hide in the dark quite a lot, and they're not as active as the thornbacks. So this could be a reason why we don't tend to see them very often in our waters. Their egg casings are quite unique as well, and they do prefer warmer waters, so they may have just regressed further south to environments that suit them a little bit better. They're a smaller species as well, average around 80 centimeters, and they do prefer shallower waters. They'll tend to switch between sandy and rocky seabeds. You can see that they'll camouflage really well on a sandy seabed, which helps. So when they bury, they can hide from predators quite easily. Still, we don't know very much about their range, and their population status is varied. They're near threatened, but we still have quite a lot of data lacking on them, just as their numbers don't come up in surveys as much as they used to. But they're quite good producers comparative with the larger species. They do produce around 60 egg casings annually. And they're a larger egg casing as well. They have that unique pinching at the bottom, so the top's more open, and yeah, depending on the condition of the egg casing, these horns may or may not be broken off. So two of the less common species we have in our waters are the starry and the white. So the white is a large-bodied species as well, like our flapper and our blue. They were targeted quite a lot because of their large size, and they tend to now, any sightings we've had have been further south rather than in our waters, further south in Europe. We haven't had any egg casings marked, so the Shark Trust haven't had any notifications of a white skate egg casing in the UK or Ireland. So the likelihood that they're still here is quite slim, but we still don't know. So hopefully with more people out on the beaches and looking for egg casings, you never know, we might be able to find some records of them being in our waters. The starry skate used to be very abundant, but unfortunately it has kind of regressed up north into cooler waters that are a little bit deeper. They tend to prefer deeper waters than compared to shallow waters. The other species we've looked at are seasonally migrate into the shallow waters, where the starry skate now you're very unlikely to see one. Their egg casings are very unique as well. So if we look at the white skate, you can see these lines running down the egg casing. So these are made out of keratin, same thing as our hair and our nails. But the starry skate has a speckling on the top. It's really rough, kind of like sandpaper. So if you find one of their egg casings, you'll know straight away, and they're quite easy to identify. But as their IUCN status shows, that there's a huge data deficit on their range, on their population, and we just don't know very much about them at all. So hopefully they will return to our waters. There may still be evidence of them further north, but since the 70s, we haven't seen very much sign of them at all. So looking at some of the common misidentifications between the common skate, the flapper and the blue. So side by side here, they do look very different, but because they're a large bodied species and because the juveniles look very different compared to the adults, they are really easily misidentified. So the flapper skate will have that olive kind of greeny eye. They'll have this beautiful spot pattern on their back, and each species of each individual flapper skate will have a different spot pattern. So if you do get a good picture, we can identify the individual and match it up through other databases to see if they tend to stay in the same area, if they're quite have quite high site fidelity, or if they do range to other breeding sites. Their thorn patterns will be quite different, and the spaces between their dorsal fins are far larger than compared to our blue, which are smaller. The blues will have that yellow eye, and they'll have the two kind of blotched target marks on the back. This is how they can get misidentified for juveniles quite often of the flapper skate. So you can see here these juveniles are completely different color to the adults. They have those large target marks on the back, and they still have a light spot pattern, but they are remarkably different compared to their adult form. So you can see how these two have possibly been mixed up over the years. But the spot pattern on the flapper skate is your key indicator, as well as the eye color is the most helpful. And the common skate grouping has been around for quite some time, but since 2010, they've been separated into two separate species. And we're hoping if we can show more people about the separation between the two, we can actually get a really good, accurate assessment on their range and their population number. So the species we know have they've been researched quite heavily, and we're very sure of their breeding and laying seasons are as follows. So the only species that has been very well researched in terms of their annually laying sites and how often they lay is the cuckoo. So they will lay between pretty much all year. They'll have a small spike in March and a small spike in August where they will lay more egg casings. But because they lay in deeper waters, that temperature change doesn't seem to affect them as much. Our ungulates will lay between March and September, with a spike in the warmer months of June and July. Same for our blondes, they tend to spike in July and August, with their breeding season being a little bit longer from February to September. The thornbacks are quite similar, but they tend to have a spike towards the end of their season as well. They'll have a small spike in March and then another big spike kind of July, August time. And then our spotted, unfortunately, doesn't lay for a very long period at all. They tend to like darker areas as well. We found in studies in captivity, but the nursery sites between laying site between April and July can be a little bit of an issue when it comes to their predation on the seals. So the seals will tend to be around the same area of the lay site. So this can be a factor that we need to keep an eye on in terms of their population and making sure it stays stable. So this is a video we took of our recent dive in Connemara looking at a thornback nursery site. So you can see there's an egg casing there. They can be difficult to spot underwater, but Tony has an eagle eye. Years of looking for nudibranchs has taught him well. This was me just checking whether the egg casing was still active. You can see that sometimes little leaves will often look like egg casings and then it turns out to be nothing. But this is a really good shot. You can see these hydroids attached around the egg casing, and they camouflage quite well. And they don't tend to be in clumps. They'll be spotted maybe in a line or in a grouping area. We're looking to hopefully identify any links of like patterns they have. But this is, you can see the seabed's a little bit different for this egg casing. So when we're looking at rays and skates and trying to get some IDing for them, there's a couple of rules for us, especially when we're trying to identify individuals. So the picture at the top is a great photo of a thornback, and we can see their spot pattern. We can see the presence of the claspers, so we know that it's a male. And that we're not too close to the skate either. There's really good resolution and good lighting. Most of the skate species tend to be more active at night, so we try not to shine a light on them too long. And it's quite important that we use a steady light rather than a strobe, just so we don't stun the rays. They rely more on the electromagnetic sensors they have in their nose than their eyesight, but still, we don't want to blind a ray or a skate when we see them. If we can try and get like their full body in, but being able to identify whether a male or female is really important. The bottom one is a flapper skate. We just see the side of it, so we wouldn't necessarily be able to identify it as an individual because we don't have that spot pattern. And yeah, resolution is obviously very important, but being able to take a photo, and even if we roughly know the area, we're more likely to see them again. So any way you can grab a good photo is helpful for us. So this is a great video that Seasearch sent us of a thornback. This is a really good representation in terms of how to act around skates. So being able to follow them is fine. They have enough area to move away from you. If you're in front of them, they can feel kind of trapped. Being above them is great as well because they have plenty of room to get away, and not being too close and not chasing them too hard. So you can see this female Thornback is able to move quite slowly, and she's not too pressured. But it also represents a great shot of their environment, especially for Thornbacks. They tend to like to hang around in lots of different areas. So it's good to see that we have those hydroids present, which we find on our egg casings, which could be an indication of a lay site. Our females tend to hang around in the areas that they lay as well quite often compared to the males. The males tend to migrate in and out of the lay sites. So this might be a resident area where we could check to see if there was any egg casings present. But you can see she's using those like modified pectoral fins to move around, which is pretty cool. So a little bit about our research and how you can get involved. So shoreline egg case searches are always really handy. They can give us a good idea of what species are in the water in that specific area, as well as being able to make a link between an in-water nursery site and the egg casings that wash up on the shoreline. So it's always great to see them, and any information, if you're walking the dog on the beach or you're out on a stroll, if you find an egg casing, it's great to know. In-water egg casing searches, we're trying to get divers out looking for rays and skates more often. So the environments aren't the most glamorous of areas, especially if you are looking to see lots of stuff in a short period of time. But you can see some really good sightings of some rays and skates in some not very fancy areas. The muddy kind of algae covered places can be tricky as well. If you've got good buoyancy, then you'll be fine, but they are a little bit treacherous. I've nearly sunk into a few areas before trying to get stable to get a good shot of an egg casing or a ray. And photo IDing. So we've had a few people out on kayaks that have seen skates. So you don't have to necessarily be in the water. If it's a good clear day, you might be able to have a good sighting. On our website, we have a few links of some forms that you can find for any sightings, as well as some egg case descriptions that you can help you for reference. Shark Trust have got a load of material as well, and they've put years of time and effort into some laminates and some special ones for children. So that's a great resource there. If you want to keep in touch on our research on social media, we have quite a few. So we're always out and about doing something. So it's great to keep an eye there. And yeah, that's really it for the moment. And thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you learned a little bit about rays and skates, and I hope there's lots of questions.